getting them, etc.
Well, the problem right now is that if you want to do a ballot level comparison audit, you can't do it using the system of record. You end up rescanning the ballots, reinterpreting the ballots using somebody's system, whether it's TEVS or OpenCount or something else, and then auditing that system.
Right.
And then transitively, if the first system says Lincoln won and the second system says Lincoln won, and you audit the second system and find it was right and Lincoln really won, well then the first system was right too. But that extra stuff is that's a non-starter for an end game, which is why I'm saying let's not go there. Let's do ballot polling, at least for big contests where it's generally more affordable, until we have equipment in place that's auditable and make the push in that direction. Because right now, the biggest problem to solve is keeping track of the ballots well, better than we do, developing good regulations and legislation around that. Because without that, the whole thing is just theater. So, so that I think is that's the first step. Get good track of the ballots, then start using them intelligently.
But should we wait 3 years to get good track of it? It sounds like we're up to
No, we should start that now. We should start it now, and we should start doing. We could do my paper with Mark Lindemann on ballot polling. The median number of ballots that states would have had to look at over the last, I think it was the last. It was the last 5 elections, so it was 50 states times 5 elections is 250, right? 50 states including DC times, okay. Was something like 200 some odd ballots per state to confirm things at 10% risk. So California, if it could keep track of its ballots, could certainly afford to look at a few hundred ballots drawn from the state as a whole. This is not an expensive prospect, right?
It's
Pushing
not small.
the margins are that big.
Your puree is that
Yeah,
clean.
it's or a tablespoon is that big. I don't know exactly how to. Yeah, I mean, it's not. The point is, most states are not swing states. I mean, most states the margins are relatively large.
Okay.
And so if you've got a 10% margin, you just don't have to look at all that many ballots before it's really clear that if you kept looking, you weren't going to miraculously have the proportion in the sample
It's not
space.
that potato with all that salt in there somewhere.
What if you had a 0.015% margin?
Yeah, then you're going to have to look at, hundreds of thousands, millions of ballots. Oh, you're talking about the controller's race?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one that I think, if we could have done a ballot level comparison audit, I think it still would have been in I'm trying to remember, but like in the hundreds of thousands of ballots range, which is still a lot cheaper than 8 million.
4 million for the
More.
race.
Yeah.
4 million.
But even then-
4 million votes.
But you have to look at the ballots, anybody who is eligible to vote on it. So even if it was undervoted by half the voters, you need to look at all of them, because it might not be a real undervote. Right? So it's the population of ballots that cast for contest, not votes.
Or it
Yeah,
might be that hole punch that got.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Anyway.
Wow.
Right.
Some
But
materials.
then you have all these states like Georgia, which is all touchscreen.
Yeah.
And you don't have anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is great because you can't catch them.
That's
I
right.
know.
It's
There's
much
too
easier
many
to audit.
states like that.
Yeah.
There's too many states like that. That's
Too many, yeah.
Some of them
I know.
are exactly Maryland and Virginia.
And
And
Who was in the
Yes.
Nebraska? Was
Our
it
touch screens are in
Wisconsin.
our house.
Wisconsin, where they borrowed voting machines for the recall election, and then had to take back the memory cards within a certain number of weeks.
Right,
Oh, days.
Yeah.
So there goes all the evidence.
right. Such as it was.
Such
Yeah.
as it was,
It
yeah.
was, yeah.
Oh, God.
So yeah, I mean, if I could, if I were trying to encourage you guys to work on any particular problem, the first thing would be ballot accounting and ballot chain of custody. We just really need better uniform
Ballot chain of
regulation.
custody, ballot counting.
Ballot accounting, ballot chain of custody.
What do you mean by
Ballot-
ballot
okay.
counting?
Accounting.
Ballot accounting.
Accounting.
Yeah.
So every jurisdiction should be able to say precinct by precinct and for vote by mail, how many did I print, how many did I mail out, how many came back voted, how many came back spoiled, how many came back, you know,
Yeah,
blah,
so
blah, blah.
all tallies
and
up.
to document it, right? And to be able to give some assurance that not only are the totals right, but you know, we had a camera watching the locked hurricane fence, you know, room
Yeah.
and blah, 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 and we reviewed the video and nobody went in there without authorization. I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff. Because without that, you know, it's all,
That's ballot accounting.
that's valid accounting.
Okay, and then the
Yeah.
other part is,
But accounting and chain of custody sort of go
Chain of
together,
custody.
yeah, to just be able to have evidence that it wasn't tampered with, and that you have all the paper. That's the first thing that we need for anything else. The second piece is then what I'm calling a ballot manifest, that every county should, you know, report how many ballots they have that were voted and how they are organized, how they are stored and organized. So they should be able to say, I have 372 boxes of ballots. The first one is labeled this, it has this many ballots in it. Without any regard for what the votes are, just
Right.
keeping track of the paper. And that's what we need to be able to do the random sampling to conduct the audit.
you know,
Yeah.
well, they do a pretty good job in Santa Clara County with that.
Do they?
I believe you,
I've
but
seen-
not all counties do.
Yeah, they
How many of
have,
the pilot counties have?
they have those boxes.
Well, one of the reasons we didn't do a pilot in Sacramento is they couldn't tell us that.
Oh, my
Wow.
goodness.
So that's necessary for the
It says
ballot
for both.
polling.
It says it's for both.
And it's sufficient for ballot polling?
Sufficient for ballot polling, yeah.
But it's not sufficient for comparison?
No.
Okay, for comparison, you really do need the numbers on each one, or what else do you?
Well, no, the biggest thing you need is for the system to export the cast vote records.
All right,
To
okay.
create and export in a usable way.
And that's the thing that's so not present.
So, well, worse, so even the systems that create a cast vote record currently shuffle them before allowing you to print them or look at them or something else, and they view this as somehow part of their EVSG compliance in preserving voter anonymity. Now, this is utterly nuts, because the LEO has the paper. How does shuffling the images, I mean, it doesn't add anything, right?
Okay. Interesting.
But it does introduce some uncertainty, which could be leading to something.
It makes it hard to audit. It makes it hard to check whether it got the right answer. It doesn't have any other function.
So it's deliberately set up to make it hard to audit.
No, it was deliberately set up because somebody had an idea that it somehow did something for voter anonymity. But when you think about, at least to my when I think about it carefully, I cannot see how it does anything to support voter anonymity, given that the LEO has the paper in the first place.
Yeah, okay.
That was the other,
The local election commission, yeah.
local election official.
So let me just make sure I have this straight, because I'm relatively new to this.
Yeah.
So currently, in many jurisdictions, when there is a voter manifest, one can do, and you have done ballot polling audits.
Yep.
Currently, nobody can do the comparison audits.
Without doing a secondary scan.
But you could if you scan them all
You could
again.
if you scan them all again,
We'll
yeah.
all agree that that's too much trouble.
Yeah.
But, so we want to have some kind of audit done everywhere, and our goal is to do comparison audits everywhere if we could, but,
It'll take a little time to get there because it's going to cost something.
so it'll always be better to do comparison audits if it's possible, because of the statistical properties you mentioned earlier.
They will always require looking at fewer ballots.
Right, okay,
Because it's linear and stuff.
Yeah.
because it's linear instead of quadratic, okay.
But there's points at which, you know, it's still not a lot of work, right?
Mhm.
Including presidential elections, because the margins tend to be big enough that it's just not that much work to do a ballot polling audit.
Mhm.
So that differential in work becomes important when the margins get to be, you know, 1%, 0.5%, 1/4%.
Okay. So that's why it's so important to get the manifests, for example, because that will enable us to sort of do 80% of what we need to do.
It's a prerequisite for anything,
For anything,
but in
yeah.
particular, it gets us going right away especially for the larger contests. And I'm only saying larger because if you look at the workload as a fraction of the number of ballots, because the workload really depends on the margin and not the number of ballots, the larger the pool of ballots, the less work it is, relatively speaking.
Right.
So it's very, you don't want to look at 1,000 ballots for your dog catcher contest. But 1,000 ballots for a presidential election is not much work, right? So even though if the margin was the same, it'd be,
So help me with this, but I think maybe I'm finally getting it. But let's say someone reports they won presidential election by 0.5%.
Yeah.
Vote, okay. But in reality, they flipped 5%, so they're lost by 4.5%. So what you're saying is with this puree process, even sampling 1,000 ballots would be sufficient to indicate,
No, it's the other way around. What would happen is you would start to sample.
right?
Your sample would very likely contain a majority for the wrong candidate. It would show, okay, so that would not give you evidence that the contest was correctly decided. So you would expand your sample.
Okay,
It would continue to show a majority for the loser.
right,
So you would continue to expand your sample,
okay,
right? And eventually, you would have counted everything, right?
okay.
Or
all
or
right.
you would have decided
So then
that.
you
Or decided you might as
Let's do
well.
this, yeah.
Yeah,
So
might
then
as
what
well.
have you done in the end? You've given the election to the bad guy.
No, it's the other way around.
No. Why is
No,
it the other way around?
so the situation is, we get the results back from the election, and Douglas beat Lincoln
Yeah.
by 0.5%.
Mhm.
And we think that Lincoln actually won.
Mhm.
Or we just want to
We
do
just
an
want to
audit.
know, we want to
Yeah.
know, did Douglas win or
But,
not?
but really, actually, we think like, but so we start counting ballots, and people were ready to say that Douglas won, because he won by 0.5%, right? So we start counting ballots, and in the first 100 ballots, Lincoln got 52 and Douglas got 48.
Okay.
So that's not evidence that Douglas won. It's like, we can't
So-
stop.
Yeah,
No,
Right.
right.
And so we do 1,000 ballots, and now
Now
Lincoln
has
got,
more.
600 and.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
showing up
so it's and so you're not going to stop. At some point, you might say, you know what, it's really looking like we're going to need to just count it all by hand. We might as
In
well
other words-
cut to the chase and do that.
Okay.
The outcome would never be overturned without doing a complete hand.
Yeah, that's because you don't want to overturn an election on the basis of statistical evidence, because there's
Okay.
a small probability that you're disenfranchising the majority on a statistical fluke, right? You don't want to do that. Right.
But so what the beauty of this is you can tell early enough whether you have to do that whole hand.
Well, it's
That thing?
yeah, please, yeah. You're coming with great analogies.
the joy is that you can tell early enough that you don't have to do a
That you
whole
don't
count.
have to do it, yeah.
So that if, on the other hand, we think Lincoln won and Lincoln got 55%, and we count the first 100 and Lincoln got 56 and Douglas got 44, and we count the first 1,000 and Lincoln got 560 or something like that, we now say, from what we
That's
see,
not evidence.
Right.
it looks like,
Yeah.
in fact, Lincoln did win, just like the
So now
count
we
seemed
need
to
the
say.
evidence.
So now we can stop counting and not count anymore, because all the votes have been counted after all. It's only in the audit that we've now checked this, and we say, oh, Lincoln won, great. Let's move on to the next election.
You're saying if Lincoln was reported the winner.
Lincoln, in this case, Lincoln was reported the
Okay,
winner,
so,
and in the
okay.
audit,
Yeah,
it turns out that Lincoln is still winning.
right, right.
You've got strong evidence.
To confirm that.
Yeah,
Right, okay,
confirm that.
all right.
Now,
That
I
helps.
still have a problem with, there are two different kind of audits. There's a comparison audit and there's a
Polling.
polling,
Ballot
yeah.
polling.
Ballot polling,
Ballot.
Ballot, yeah.
ballot polling.
So I should say, you can also do batch level comparison audits that look at things like they tally precinct and compare that to the reported tally precinct. I've given up on those because they turn out not to be any more efficient than the ballot polling audits in general. The number of ballots you look at, it doesn't really save you a lot of trouble. And so, but they have enormously higher setup costs, because you've got to export this stuff at the batch level, you've got to get that in the machinery to form, so forth and so on. So you can do it the other way. It's just what we found in the pilots was that it wasn't worth it. You might as well wait until you can do it at the ballot level.
And try to do that simple random sample
Yeah,
from all
yeah,
the ballots
all the
or
ballots.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, yeah, so it's, there is a middle ground, it's just not a particularly comfortable place to be.
On a logistical level question, has your method ever been put into the hands of a regular ROV?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
was able to carry this?
Yeah,
out?
in fact, Cuyahoga County, Ohio did a batch level comparison audit on their own with absolutely no help from me. Humboldt used my web tool to audit on their own. And another county, audited on its own in California. I can't remember who that was right now, again, using the web tool. And when the last audits we did in Arapahoe, we did both a ballot level comparison audit and a ballot polling audit. And I went there and like stuff was just kind of in disarray. We weren't really able to do it. I left. And they did it the next day without me. So
So it's easy
it is pretty straightforward. It's pretty straightforward.
with your
Is that a
web.
hint that it's better if you're not there?
I would
I
love
left
to
and they told
be,
me
I
I
would
was
love to be unnecessary. That would be, yeah, definitely.
Disassociated.
I'm not getting paid anyway, right?
They're invited around that.
So, yeah,
Well,
it's,
that's encouraging.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those ROEs were not more mathematically sophisticated or, no, okay.
No, it's, the tool's pretty straightforward, if you wanna, but it's not meant to be a production piece of software, it's more proof of concept, just to show that it doesn't have to be that complicated. So,
Okay.
yeah, ideally, you would be reading in, the cast vote records or other stuff from the system of record, rather than typing in things about manifests and this and that and results, so forth and so on. So there'd be a lot more plumbing under the hood. But it's just to sort of show that you can, the steps are relatively straightforward.
Okay.
Okay, we have some other things to do.
All right, thanks a lot, nice to
Boy,
see
thank
you all.
you very much.
Very interesting.
Hopefully
Thanks
you
for the
have-
popcorn.
You've got a light. You have a light
And
for your
cookie if you
Yeah, I
want.
do. Thank you. I avoid wheat, but thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
that's fine.
Excellent.
And sugar too, lots.
Thank you.
Sugar is.
Butter.
Toodles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, so if, well, I guess he works at UC Berkeley, he's in
Yes.
the statistics department.
So is he must live close? Well,
He must, yeah.
He's a Berkeley professor.
So- If possible, I'd like somebody to write up with some detail, the difference between those two types of audits, the comparison audit and the ballot polling audit,
Can
because
we go over
I didn't
this?
get it.
I didn't get it either.
I think I got, once you go for it, because you're more
Okay.
succinct.
So there are,
The ballot polling and
and the comparison
yeah.
Right.
audit. So there are two fundamental ways to do these audits, from what I was gathering from tonight.
Yeah.
In one of them, the ballot polling audit, what we're going to do is we're going to choose ballots at random from the whole set of ballots. And we're going to start looking at them and see, using the formulas in his paper, but start figuring out what the current proportion is of votes for the winner and votes for the alleged loser. Okay? And we will keep going until we figure out that we think the winner actually won, or theoretically, we have recounted the entire system. We might decide partway through that actually continuing with this random sampling process is too arduous, and we just want to recount the whole thing. So what the whole last half a paragraph is going to apply to both of these, but I maybe should back up and try to do the comparison between these two schemes now.
Right, okay.
So this first one, ballot polling, is we have, as I mentioned before, we're gonna choose these ballots at random and just count them.
Yeah.
Notice that we are not for this thing, we are not checking whether this ballot was counted correctly or not by the system.
Can I add a
Yeah.
footnote to that? What I had just figured out is that our point of comparison in the ballot polling method is the result of the election.
Correct, yes, right.
And
So-
both methods have a point of comparison, but for the ballot polling method, you're always referring back to the general outcome, whereas for ballot comparison, you're comparing ballot by ballot by ballot.
Point of
Two.
comparison is the election result in the
Right.
polling.
And in the ballot comparison, then, you're comparing ballot by ballot to what the system claims the ballot said.
The ballot polling, I mean, that part finally sunk in when I said exit poll. You're doing an exit poll with the ballots.
Yeah, right.
Hmm. You're asking the ballot who did you vote for, only you're taking a random selection of ballots.
Right.
So the
Okay.
image is that the voters come out of the voting
Right.
place and you kidnap them. And you
Yes.
keep them all there together
Yeah.
until you can ask a random selection of them how they voted.
That would be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
But you're asking the ballots, how did you vote?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Ballots
It's
are
kind of the same thing.
standing.
It's kind of like capturing your
Yeah,
ballots.
and then you get your exit poll and you compare that against the real result.
Right, okay. So
Now,
that's the
comparison.
ballot polling,
In comparison,
ballot comparison, yeah.
the thing is, the system has a record, anonymized somehow, but a record for every ballot of what it thought the ballot said.
Right, okay,
How
So
it counted it,
yeah.
how it counted that particular ballot.
yeah.
And so what we do in ballot comparison is we still take a random selection of ballots from the entire universe of ballots. And you take the first one and you compare it to what the system says it said, because it has this little random number on it. But this random number matches the random number in the system, but is not sequential so that we can't tell who came first to the polling place or anything like that. So it matches that thing in the system, we look it up in the database or something like that, we compare and we see if it's actually correct. And we continue with that long enough that we are convinced that enough of these are correct, that the end result is in fact the end result that all the
And
ballots
that the
would be.
machinery itself was counting them out.
That the machinery was counting it accurately. So what we really expect is that a vast majority of all ballots will be correct anyway.
Right.
And so by doing this, most elections are going to be fine. But by doing this random selection, we would detect places where the physical ballot does not match the record of the ballot. And if there's 5% malfeasance or something like that, a few hundred comparisons are going to detect that. And if it's a 5% malfeasance, but the good guys won by 20%, it's not going to matter, right? Because it's not big enough, and that's what part of what the risk limiting thing is.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that the good guys did the malfeasance?
No, I'm suggesting the bad guys went to a lot of effort for nothing because the good guys won anyway.
That's what Bush
Yeah.
one, Bush one did that, in essence, with when his second presidential election, when he lost to Clinton, because they said, we underestimated the popular turnout. And he basically because what happened was you got a 10% greater vote for Clinton, because he was the first black candidate. And they had flipped.
He wasn't
but
black.
it-
Yes, he was.
He was best, by a lot of people, he was viewed as black. So what happened was a large majority of, it takes several weeks, it takes almost 2 months to record your outcome in the software.
Mhm.
So the assumption was that they had recorded it with a 5% flip, and it wasn't sufficient. I mean, that's, yeah, no, that's.
Yeah, that happened in one of the off-term elections too, because within a couple of weeks before the election, there was scandal after scandal after scandal of the Republicans.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it blew their
Proportion.
estimate of
Yeah.
how much they would need to shift.
Yeah, you have to have, it has to be within the realm of probability, so it's not so ludicrous.
Right, has to be plausible.
Plausible, right,
Yeah.
and if somehow like these
Right.
Republican senators from the Midwest who came out and said, well, if it's really not rape, then the body doesn't get pregnant, I mean,
Yeah.
those kind of statements
Yeah.
just blew their pre-election
Credibility.
estimates
Yeah.
of what margin they needed to flip
Yeah,
that.
the
I mean,
guy
that's-
propositioning some other guy in the bathroom, there
Yeah,
was all these
recorded on cell
scandals.
phone or something, yeah.
One after the other.
Meanwhile, if we could return to you seem to have a,
Well, we have some other things to get done here.
Okay.
And I don't know if you wanted to talk to us about something or not.
Oh, you could just hang out for just another 15 minutes, I think.
Somebody's supposed to come and answer an